In 2011, the world witnessed the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. 3 reactors at Fukushima went into partial meltdown after a tsunami slammed into Japan's east coast. The tsunami and earthquake that caused it killed 20,000 people and destroyed 120,000 buildings. And it also killed Japan's nuclear industry, at least for a while.
Japan has switched on its first nuclear power station since the tsunami.
The decision marks a reversal of a decade-old policy.
But nuclear plants remain deeply unpopular.
More than a decade after the disaster, nuclear power is back in business. So why is Japan returning to nuclear? What does it mean for climate change? And who is trying to stop it? Before Fukushima, Japan had 54 reactors producing around a third of the nation's energy. The industry was virtually shut down after the disaster, but it was revived following the election of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in 2012. Over the next decade, reactors were gradually switched back on, and by 2023, nuclear provided around 8% of Japan's energy. The government now wants to expand that to 20% by 2040, and its latest energy strategy has removed statements calling for less reliance on nuclear power. Japan will need to restart old reactors and build new ones if it wants to achieve these targets, and some energy experts doubt it can be done by 2040. But nuclear proponents say there are 3 reasons why they should try. The first is energy security. Japan is heavily reliant on imported fossil fuels like coal, oil and gas.
In the aftermath of Fukushima disaster, this reliance has gone up tremendously to the extent that almost 90% of fuel is imported.
This lack of self-sufficiency was thrust into the spotlight after the invasion of Ukraine and disruption of global energy markets.
While Japan is not heavily reliant on Russia, which has made a lot of nations, including Japan, reconsider and rethink their own position.
Nuclear won't solve this problem. Japan still needs to import uranium from Australia, Canada and Kazakhstan. But nuclear plants require smaller quantities of fossil fuels, and Japan is investing in repurposing facilities, which they hope can extract more energy from spent fuel. The next argument is demand. Despite Japan's shrinking population, the country is bracing for a boom in demand, all thanks to data centres. These power-hungry facilities are essential for operating growth industries like cloud computing and AI. Hokkaido Electric says that would justify restarting their reactors, and one of the biggest investors in AI, Google owner Alphabet, wants more nuclear power to help decarbonise their operations. And that leads to the final argument: climate change. Because nuclear power plants don't produce emissions while operating, some see them as a clean alternative to other fossil fuels. And that has helped boost public support for nuclear power, despite ongoing concerns about safety.
The global trend toward zero carbon and energy security problem are the big factors for changing the people's mind. But most Japanese people do not forget the Fukushima accident.
Japan has pledged to cut emissions by 46% by 2030. But the rollout of renewable energy like offshore wind and solar has been slow, partly due to Japan's challenging topography, and some argue that emissions can't be cut as much as needed without nuclear power. Meanwhile, some communities struggling with population decline want their nuclear plants switched back on to bring money into town. So can nuclear power deliver? Not everyone is convinced.
Japan's government is building this nuclear castle in the sky, and once that collapses, their climate strategy does so too. The absolute best case, and that would be all of the remaining reactors are being restarted, including the one sitting on top of a fault line, the one damaged by seawater, the one the mayor wants to shut down. The numbers will fall short. Why is the Japanese government holding on to nuclear power? My hunch is that they simply lack a plan B.
This isn't the first time Japan has bet on nuclear. The Kyoto Protocol was the first global treaty to reduce emissions, and after it was signed in 1992, Japan planned to build 21 new reactors by 2010. Anti-nuclear activist Eileen Miyoko Smith says that ultimately delayed climate action.
Only 8 reactors got built, and in the meantime, we lost a whole decade working on really more assertive use of renewables.
Eileen has been fighting to end nuclear power since the 1980s. Today, she leads Green Action, which is using the law to stop restarts.
There are lawsuits all over Japan, lawsuits against the government, lawsuits suing the companies.
There have always been lawyers fighting nuclear power plants, but what they did after the accident is they formed an association to cooperate nationwide and to share the lessons learned and to look at what works, what doesn't.
We have won multiple lawsuits, but then losing in appellate court. So it's a struggle. But I think that it's successful in delaying restarts.
While advocates fight in court, the power companies are battling regulators. Because after Fukushima, the government established a new independent safety authority.
It was basically separated from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, which had been promoting nuclear power for decades.
Safety was enhanced, very strict regulation was now in force.
Before a power company can restart their reactor, they need to complete a range of upgrades, from radiation-proofing control rooms to 40-metre high tsunami walls.
These are gigantic construction projects. The nuclear operators completely underestimated how much it would cost them to actually meet the new safety standards. That is, of course, impacting the economic viability of nuclear power as a business. The government still has a pro-nuclear policy line. But the ones that are, bearing the brunt of the costs, the operators, some of them are silently exiting the nuclear power business.
For the companies that remain, the government hopes they will build the next generation of reactors. These include small modular reactors designed to be fast and cheap, to high-temperature gas-cooled reactors to power energy-intensive industries like steel production. If Japan wants to meet its climate goals and ensure it has enough power for the future, it'll have to build something, whether that is more nuclear, more renewables, or something else.
Island nation like Japan, with limited usable land, it is challenging to make renewable available cheaply, stably, and without being affected by the weather. Our stance is to use everything that is available.
Working on climate, you need fast, cheap, and reliable. And fast means you can't be talking about new reactors that are pie in the sky, 20, 30 years down the line. That's just going to be too late.